Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you know about something that is so exciting that we have on the forefront. We will soon be releasing a course called Brand Belief, which is all about how to build a brand that you and your clients believe in. This goes far beyond just selecting a logo and a few colors to go with it. This is an intuitive journey about your customers' needs, their desires, their values, and how you can make their lives easier through the services that you provide. This is about how you can be of service in this world through a brand that has both longevity and legacy attached to it. Click the link in the description. That will tell you a bit more information, and it will allow you to sign up so that you can be notified when this course is launching. Now we hope you enjoy the episode. Hi everyone, Ariana here from Well-Fed Photography, and I am joined by author and host of the Questions of Fire podcast, Jonathan McGuinness. Jonathan, would you like to just tell us a bit about yourself for the beginning of this episode?
Well, thank you, Ariana, for inviting me onto your podcast as well. Myself is probably a usual character and unusual character. I grew up in Ireland in the 70s and 80s, where it wasn't a particularly great time from an economic and environmental standpoint. Most people were thinking about, will I go away to England? Will I go away to America? There was unemployment. But I left college when something new happened, and that new was the internet. And I had just finished a degree in computer science at exactly the same time in the 90s. So it was almost like a tsunami of abundance had hit Ireland. On the way into that, what I do, the Irish culture has something. You know, if you've lived in Ireland, there's this sort of underdog attitude, and I was part of the culture. I didn't have any distinctions from the culture, and the attitude obviously had been dominated by colonists, and people were lucky in some ways in being nice to each other, but they had a tendency to complain and not do a lot. So I remember an example that sort of changed my life when I was younger. I was 14 years of age from my house, and this old lady, Mrs. McHugh, beautiful lady, not with us anymore, says, "Oh, it's a miserable day, isn't it?" And me as a cheeky young 14-year-old said, "Well, if you don't like it, there's a whole rest of the planet you can go and live on." And I would just got tired of that sort of mentality. Now, I wasn't being a very nice young guy to the elder lady, but I couldn't tolerate complaining of doing something. And that, in combination with the fortune that I had, my mom decided to keep foreign students when we were children. So people from Spain and France, and they were coming to learn English. And luckily, when I was 12, I got to go away for 6 weeks to one of those families when he had lived with us for a year and eat things like prawns, which now I know nowadays are normal in Ireland. But 40 years ago, to pull the head off a prawn and suck its head and eat the inside was weird, and speak different languages. So I got this taste for variety, and I also had this sort of resistance or this want to get away from this complaining and intolerance. So between the two of them, I didn't realize that over the next many years, and we'll get onto my story a bit further, is I've now lived in 12 countries, Ariana. And it's amazing how your teenagehood could evolve into something so different. And some people ask me, well, personality is a really important thing. And when someone gets to know you, they're kind of like, well, what do you like? What do you not like? Where would you like to go? What are your dreams? And I've had a few interesting elements in that. I did martial arts for years, and I did them for about 15 years, kickboxing, karate, everything. And what they mostly tend to do is get you to practice particular moves and get really good at them. So I'd been doing it for about 12 or 13 years. And one of my best friends had been studying ninjutsu in Dublin. He says, "Jonathan, come on in, you can try it." Now, I was quite accomplished at that stage. I came in and they gave me a brown belt to spar against. In 30 seconds, he had me down. He had dead in both arms. He had dead in both legs. I thought, I'm convinced I want to do something this effective. And I couldn't see it coming. It was literally, so I joined up. First of all, I dropped everything else. I joined in ninjutsu. And what they trained us to do, the very first thing, which was fantastic, was not to get stuck on any one technique, but to do the most effective thing. So when you learn to roll, I don't know if you remember as a kid, you roll on your right shoulder, and then people had a preference. I would have always gone for my right. everything we did, we had to do without preference, because in a real situation, your back might be to a wall or to a whatever, but it wasn't about the fighting. It was, hold on, am I prepared enough to do things in different directions? And that sort of, that played a big role in making sure I'm prepared for things rather than fixing in on, oh, that's my strength, or this is my strength. And then I suppose the last one around that is in terms of preferences. Most people say, well, Jonathan, where is the favorite place that you've lived in? And my honest answer is there's 195 countries in the world. Anything except the 12 I've been in would be actually my favorite place to go. My personality is based on where my future's going. It's not actually on, if you look at my past, where did I grow up? You know, what school did I go to? That actually becomes less and less important. But where I'm going actually defines who I am right now, for me at least, much more than where I've been. It's still important. You can't neglect it, but it's, because you had asked me a question is, you know, what type of person am I as part of coming onto here? And it made me really rethink about that, because people don't often say this type of thing out loud. But so who I am is where I'm going, Ariana. That's my initial answer to probably a question and a long roundabout answer for you.
I love that. That's beautiful, because the thing is, actually, it ties in so well. I've just built a course called Brand Belief, how to build a brand that you and your clients believe in. And when I was going through that, I was realizing
Wow.
how much Well-Fed Photography was a brand that I built as an ideal. It was where I wanted to go. It led me there. It allowed for my transition and ascension to that place, that person that I wanted to be,
Wow.
through the brand identity that I built. And I so agree that, you know, yes, some things that we've experienced have been ingredients to make up the composition of who we are, but where we're going
Yeah.
it directs our lives so much more. At least for me, I would agree that where I'm going is so much more a directive than where I've been. So I love that answer.
Yeah, like what I found about that, and I'm still discovering, it's an ongoing process, Ariana, is those of us who are stuck in the past, probably is we've had events and we haven't properly dealt with them. You can call them traumas, or you're emotionally frozen towards the past. But if you do a bit of work on yourself and you dig up those stones in the soil and let the plants of yourself grow, the future becomes a much greater part of who you are than what the past is. So when you talk to someone and you're having these conversations, you can tell whether they have done the work or not, or whether they needed to or not, by exactly that. And our identity can allow us to strive for a vision much greater than where we're at. And I think that's fantastic what you're doing with Well-Fed Photography.
Thank you so much. And can you tell me, are these experiences what inspired you to write the book, or what was the inspiration behind writing Questions of Fire?
So what I started off with, I was lucky enough with the internet. I went in as an employee for 1 year, but within that year for the company I was working for, I was actually supporting 5 clients, but they were only giving me 1 salary. And I asked the boss several times, well, I think my value is a little more. And he says, well, you're only X out of college, so that's it. And so the clients came over to me, and I set up a company with one of the guys who was working for me, and my revenue went through the roof, and I realized all of that money was going above my head. It's the same. They weren't actually paying any more money, but they were just paying it to me instead of the company that I was working for. So in that process, there was a lot of, and it was a growth I wasn't ready for. I come from a very working class background. So, you know, there was amount of things. There was great sense of community. People were good with each other. But in terms of abundance, there was more a scarcity mentality. When all this abundance came my way, I actually didn't know how to have that energy. It was great. I got to go travel places, holidays. You know, I had a wife and kids that started to that time. But I really didn't know how to grow and didn't realize how limited I was. So I did that for a number of years, probably topping out regularly. There's these glass ceilings, we'll call them. They're more of our beliefs than a real ceiling that's there. I came to a point, and I remember it very, very well. I was at work at the time in 2007, and I was walking down with my wife and 2 lovely kids at the time. And And I went through a day with them, just walking around Zurich, and they were asking their normal, lovely questions about, Monica said, well, why is this happening? And the boys, we had, Dad, what's that? What's this? What? And I was getting frustrated all the time. And I didn't understand it at the moment, but why do they ask these questions? Why to me? I've never been here before. They haven't been here before, but how am I supposed to know the answers if I haven't been here before? And what I had realized, because the way I was educated, and I'm not blaming the education system, but this was my funnel of thinking, was I was very much a how person. So I went into software engineering, and I was like, here's a problem. And the only question I ever asked myself was, how do I solve it? And I was really good at solving the problem. Now, I wouldn't have been a good business person at all, because I didn't say, well, why do you want it? What do you want it for? As long as it was a how, I would do it. Like, I've run marathons. How do I do it? I go and do it. There was no reasoning of the background, the drivers, the understanding of it. But I didn't realize how much that limitation of asking only the question how impacted my relationships, because people had a much wider variety of, or maybe they had also small varieties, but from different points of view. And I wasn't able to manage my communications very well, because if somebody wasn't asking me how, I was just frustrated. If someone asked me why I was, I'm not in a psychotherapy session. Sigmund Freud, and I've read Sigmund, well, Anna, his daughter, published them. And I understand, I haven't abused anybody, etc. So for me, psychology was this negative why that Sigmund Freud and all his papers gave to me in the time. So someone asking me, that drive me mad. And if you knew something already, or you knew the other person didn't ask, why would you ask them? Like, I'm probably not going to ask you a question that I think you don't know. What I would probably do, and this is kind of an example, I would probably ask you, do you know anyone who might know? Because then if you can tell me the answer, you're in a relaxed position, but you can over deliver to me by telling me, even though I never asked you to know that. I lived in that smaller circle of placing the responsibility and accepting the responsibility directly for any question that was for me. And that's extremely stressful. So this day in Zurich, when I was walking around with my wife and kids, I had a mental crash, and I didn't fully get it. And even how I'm describing the questions wasn't there. And I wrote it, I'm a little bit weird, and you can ask my wife about it. I wrote her an email that evening explaining what I just explained to you about, the different questions. And it was starting to click, the model that I was working by. I didn't realize it, and I was already running global projects and different things because I was just getting the job done. And from that, instead of just spinning in my head, I worked in a huge department in Zurich. I wrote down my ideas, and all of the guys who worked for me mostly actually said, what do you think of that? And I remember I went around, this is the sheet I had was, how do we create mutually beneficial relationships? So I wanted to have a communication where whatever was happening was mutually beneficial. It was good for you, Ariana, and it was good for me. And it was a new world, because before it was just do that. And I go, yeah, okay, how do I do it? And go and do it. And then this idea of understanding, okay, well, you want, now maybe by me just doing the how rather than figuring out the why, I might have gone down the wrong path. And I probably did loads of times and didn't realize it at the time. Still get solved because I'd bang my head against the wall. Stubbornness and determinism were incredible. So having this sort of, I wasn't even given that person the opportunity for me to do as well I could by not asking them why, because that sets a different context or whatever. So this whole model, I remember going to the Longman's English Dictionary. At the back of it, there are different spectrums within language on certainty, for example. So I could, I can, I would, I will, I am, I've already done. So that means how certain is something and so the back of the dictionary is a whole load of valuable things I didn't know about language. I started thinking in terms of spectrums of, okay, well, certainty is obviously something that's really, really important. And then there was these open questions, which you've obviously heard me use. It's well, how do these fit together? How do these, there are 7 open questions if you look at them. And how do they all fit together? And it wasn't there. All of the questions were there. And I do hear people, there's Simon Sinek, and he'll start with why, and there's loads of different models, but all 7 of them, how did they fit together to make a communication model? And this, like, I was actually working with big groups and facilitating them all the time, start to realize how powerful it was to only allow certain questions to be asked in certain circumstances. So this model evolved from 2007. I wrote a book. Being an engineer, I wrote a how-to manual. So it was like, do this, then this, then this, and this, process 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that probably took me a couple of years before I actually finished the book, because the book wasn't the idea in the beginning. I was actually doing a self-discovery. How the hell do I communicate with everybody properly? And so it's mutually beneficial. And then I thought, hold on, I'm one of the people who do RTFM. I won't say it's read the F manual. I actually do, because I'm of that type of person. And I was writing it in that type of way as well. And I thought, hold on, I'm one of those weirdo nerd guys. But people don't actually read the manual. I'm one of those few people who do. People love stories. So I said, hold on, no, I'm not a writer. I would love to do it. So I actually hired a ghostwriter, very successful ghostwriter, but not to write the story for me, to teach me. I went on Skype calls once a week with him to teach me how to turn the process into a story where you've got a protagonist, people who are against him, people who are with him, like his wife, his work. So it was a whole exploration of, how do I turn a process into a story? Because we work in stories. If you tell me a funny story, I'll remember that much more than I will. Step 1 was this, step 2 was this, step 3 was that. I'll forget that after like a day probably, but the story will stick for me maybe in my lifetime. So I worked with this guy for at least a year, and then over the next couple of years, wrote a story where each chapter more or less represented a process, but it was more an interaction with the environment, and the depth of my understanding of even what was happening to me increased. So I'd nearly recommend to anybody just to go through the process to understand what the message is that you're trying to go through. And it didn't actually end up in Amazon until I think it was November 2018. So it was 11 years, Ariana. So if anyone thinks it's a short, now, if you gave me a book now to say, jump, go and do it, I could probably do the whole process in 3 to 6 months. But it was 11 years. And I was disheartened. I always wanted to be an author. I'm there now and I'm delighted. 11 years, I must be really, really slow. So I asked a couple of the people who I admire who'd already written books, could you write me a testimonial or a reference about me? And one of the guys, I won't mention his name, but I know him very, very well. And he has several books out now, which are quite successful. He said, Jonathan, don't mind that at all. My first one took me 14 years. So, any of you who are out there right now who are thinking it's something I have, it's half on the shelf, it's partly in my brain, take out your pen and paper, just go at it, go at it, go at it. And it's not unusual to find that story among people who are now authors. And what's disappointing, Ariana, is how many books are actually in attics or on shelves that would be wonderful for us all to read. So that's the story of how the book came about, Ariana.
Absolutely, I agree on so many points, and that's why we decided, I didn't want to do a how-to manual for breastfeeding. I wanted stories that had those nuggets of wisdom and knowledge. So I so appreciate the approach that you have taken. What is and the other thing I'll say is it reminds me of our connection of Robert Kiyosaki, because his wife Kim was saying she had a certain goal. She wanted to buy 10 properties in 10 years or something like that. And I think she ended up doing it in 2, because once she did the process once, she knew what to expect, and she was able to rinse and repeat. So I so agree that I have a lot more books in me as well. Once this one's done, there's so many more to come. And I have every faith through the things
Fantastic.
You've just said that, you can go and you can do the process again. So my question is, what is one of the most powerful messages that you received? One of the things that you've integrated into your life through writing this book, through going through that process, that 11-year process?
Well, first of all, as I described, there was a pivot, because I came in with I'll call it an engineer, scientific, let's write out the experiment, the conclusions, and have the process. And story is not just good for selling the book, it's actually good for my own understanding of how things work. So when you have something difficult, I think this is, I'm literally feel like I'm distilling the answer as we speak. When you have something difficult, make it as simple as possible and then actually build a story around it. I think it's so much, much more powerful in so many ways. Like I remember poems my granddad taught me when I was like 5 years, which I never forget them. And they were just, you know, they are little stories. But if you ask me, what did I do with my third class teacher? I don't remember a thing. You know, so I do think learn the powers, even if you think, because I think a lot of people have maybe through the school system felt, oh, I wasn't good at English, I wasn't good at this, or, you know, we all have it in us. It's actually just something to be cultivated, to given a little bit of time, like a flower in the garden, to water it and practice it and check up on it. I think, no, I think is really weak in this case. I know in my heart and soul that everybody has this capability within them, and just turn the nuggets that you have into stories.
Yes, it's my firm belief that every single person on this planet has a story. Definitely, definitely. Um, and I'm curious too, just how any of this might have influenced your ability to parent, just because a lot of our listeners, they're parents as well. So I'm curious, going through this process, understanding different ways of asking questions or having experiences, has this influenced how you parent your four boys?
Sure, absolutely. And I have four boys, 22, 19, 12, and 9. And as time goes by, they got better versions of me. I was more distilled as a parent, more educated as a parent. So, you know, God bless my two older children in comparison to my two younger children, because in my wife and the knowledge, not just from the book, but I will recommend one book that really changed my life as a parent, and it was recommended to be by my wife, who has much better parenting skills. I've read it 18 times, Ariana, and every now and again when I'm showing old habits, she says, it's time for a refresh, Jonathan. There's a book by a very famous guy called John Gray. He wrote Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, but he wrote another book called Children Are From Heaven. And Children Are From Heaven has 5 messages. It's absolutely fantastic. It's fundamentally built around mistakes are okay. I think reading the book itself is a fabulous piece of parenthood, and why I related it so much. I grew up in a working class background, so money was there but limited. So a mistake was costly. So mistakes weren't okay. And then when you have that limitation, people's tensions and stresses, not because they want to be bad, but they have limitations in the resources available to them, act differently. And so a couple of things, as I said, abundance came my way. Abundance also gives you behavioral flexibility as much as new questions give you behavioral flexibility, or your understanding that I can recover from mistake. So within that process, I would have given my older guys a bit of a slap or whatever, if they went outside my perceived limitations of what I could control, I became controlling. That would have been the previous me. Whereas, so I can literally almost define this. If it was a garden and they went over the garden fence, then I turned on the soldier Jonathan, in you get here, grab them, in they come. But when a mix between all of life's events, abundance happening, questioning myself in varieties of ways, allowed me to think, hold on, there's more than one way, and even there are many ways to deal with any particular circumstance. The first time, you remind me of a memory. Our first child, who was born in Oslo, and So there were a couple of things actually. One was the first time we wanted to go out the door. We were leaving the apartment. I was at the door waiting for my wife, and it probably took her 15 minutes because there was nappies, there was bottles, there was this, and there was, and I'm like going mad, you know. As I kind of, we normally walk out the door. Why can't we just like throw them in the pram, get out the door? Like I couldn't, I actually couldn't cope with it. It was like, no, it's no difference. It's just a body. Throw it in the pram and off we go. No. But like, obviously the kids grew up well because I have a wonderful wife, not because of, it's because of my changes that they're better. And it really started, children do a wonderful thing of, well, they can do a wonderful thing of making you appreciate and make things important that were not important to you as a single person. And a couple of weeks later, there was, I remember very well, because there was a blocking of the sun, what do you call a sun eclipse? And we were sitting in a cafe in Oslo. Yeah, that was in 99. Yeah, 99. And we were sitting in it. And before that, like kids would have been, you know, if they're screaming and this and the other, would have been like, oh God, you know. But this time there was a kid screaming. And the only difference is a couple of months before I had a baby, or Monica had a baby. And I actually, in my head, I went, oh, I hope that mom or dad finds a way to resolve it with the kid. So just by putting on the dad hat, nothing happened. I didn't have any therapy or treatment or whatever. But my idea with dad hat on was, it's really important now to look at this differently. And I think I hope that most people go through that process of, we say, okay, how do I now, with the responsibility of what I have to do, think differently? Like I've signed a lot of contracts in my life, but the most nervous I ever was signing something was, we went to the town hall in Oslo and we were asked to write the birth cert. Okay, this will be his name. And actually, I remember it's the only time my hand shook doing a signature, because I'm taking on the responsibility of another human being. And it really, I was like nervous like this, and I shook my hand. I'm so shaky. Anyway, they accepted. He still has his name, and he has lived with it. He seems to like it, you know. So I know there's a few mini stories within that, but the process of becoming a parent is an ongoing one, Ariana.
Yes, and it gives me a great hope, because there are times that I feel like I'm not the parent that I want to be, but to hear you talk about the evolution that you've had just through parenthood gives me hope that things can continue to get better and relationships can be nurtured and strengthened as we go.
Well, there's one story, and I'd love to put a bit of hope at the end of the tunnel. Our oldest boy was 14, so this is a long way down the line. And we decided we'd go for a walk. I don't know if you know Greystones, there's a lovely cliff walk there. We decided to walk, and the boys were a little bit older, so it would have been 14, 12, and then smaller ones. And for the very first time, the older ones were taking care of the younger ones, and I could hold my wife's hand and enjoy the walk, Ariana. It was fantastic. It was just like, hold on, hi, how are you? Oh, can we hold hands? Because the boys were taking care of each other, and it was like, okay, it took 14 years, but you know, there's light in the tunnel, and it started getting better and better since. But that was the first real, and 14 years is a long time to put yourself second or third to little bodies that you have come into your life that you've decided you're going to take care of. But it was a wonderful feeling. I just want to let those who are going through maybe some hard times at the moment know there is a beautiful future at some point along the line. Now, where that'll happen for you, I don't know.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I'm going to ask, because I know that whenever I was on your podcast, Questions of Fire, I was able to speak about breastfeeding. And I know that that's something that you've experienced as a family as well. So what was it like for you to be a partner of someone who was breastfeeding your children?
Okay, we've had 4 kids. So we've had one in Norway, 2 in Ireland, and 1 in Italy. So that means we've had sort of 3 cultural responses to how that happens. Now, the first one was in Norway. I don't know if you know about the Nordic countries, but they are completely pro the way of nature and the caring for the family, and family really do come first in a very, very practical way. Like when we were there in hospital, we had a double bed. I stayed in the hospital with her by her side for the few days. It's like, it's just at another level, Ariana. So when it came to breastfeeding, that was encouraged and she went ahead with it. And we learned about that if you have more than enough milk, that, you know, you can help other mothers who are struggling with that. And so that was also new for my wife in that sense. So the idea of publicly, whether that, when I mean publicly, I mean literally, you know, park on a bench or in my workplace or anything, it was just totally accepted as you're doing the best thing for your kid by breastfeeding them. So our first experience, which is really important because your first experience tends to taint whatever comes after that. And not only just the breastfeeding, even the hospitalization. You know, when women give birth, quite often women give birth and they're lying on their back. And that was brought in by the Sun King, Louis XIV. But in Norway, he said, well, you can have the baby standing up. We have a bath there with water. You know, there were a load of options that were just normal for them. And Ireland and Italy, which are the two other countries, don't have quite that. They have more the standard Louis XIV approach, I'll call it, to that birthing process. Now, there are fabulous people who work in the industry, etc., but Norway and those areas are particularly fantastic about it. So we learned about from the breastfeeding, it was very acceptable, very normal, and people actually helped or got out of the way, or, you know, there would be no such thing as, you know, a pregnant woman or a woman with a new baby standing on a bus or waiting for something. And it was actually in such a beautiful time in life that ladies would leave their babies in the pram outside the supermarket, go in for half an hour and do the shopping and come back out. Now, I don't know many places in the world where you can do that, Ariana. And people, the way it was, though, you felt that every person would be a guardian to your child. So the child was almost part of a community, not just yours and mine as owners, but as in the community would look out for anything that was happening. So we got the idealistic, paradisical type beginning to, we say, the breastfeeding story as part of that picture. Now, we also came to Ireland a couple of years later, and I think with the first experience, it was, you know, and the first guy was breastfed for quite a while. Our comfort and our understanding of how it, what's good, because you read a lot during those times, you know, for example, there's only less than 3% protein in milk. Well, if there's only less than 3% protein in milk, in mother's milk, why are we trying to eat so much as adults? You know, so we have a lot of excess protein in our diet, and you learn, and you know, there's a couple of things. It's also good for the mother. I think you're probably obviously expert. It helps the mother's body come back and contract back into normality as well. Whereas if, you know, you've been, we say, unfortunate and also fortunate enough to have a cesarean and other things, you know, the woman's body coming back to a normal state is a much more difficult process. So between the benefits that we saw for the woman and for the baby, we kind of, with the first experience, says, okay, well, we're going to do this again. And for each kid, it was more or less longer and longer, and we're almost lived in our own bubble and ignored the norm. So if we had have reintegrated to the Irish or Italian mentality relative to the Norwegian, I'm not saying they're bad, but relative, we probably wouldn't have gone longer and longer. We probably would have gone less and less in terms of the amount of time and just our, this is a brilliant way to do it. And you could have tried to convince me otherwise and it wouldn't have happened. Obviously now my wife is the one doing it. I'm, as a father, I have to say it's fantastic. You don't have to get up in the middle of the night making bottles, or, you know, and you become a lot more relaxed about rules. Like you talk to parents about these things, and some parents have, well, a kid needs to go to bed in their own bed after this age at a certain time of night. And I would say our kids stayed in our bed for quite a long time. We weren't in a hurry, you know, and that became a you know, the family became more important and what felt right more than, we say, abstract rules that were given us to us. And I don't care whether they're a qualified whatever, this or the other. I think we all should agree that we can feel in our own heart and our own mind, now is the right time, it's kind of happening. And they almost start doing it. Like, one of the things that I found, we say, interesting in people's psychology is, well, if you take care of something so much, maybe they'll want a baby, they'll want to be dependent on you for their whole life. But I think it's very different. If you actually give them a sense of security, they actually feel more secure in themselves as they go out. And I'm going to give a brilliant example. I was very fortunate with my dad. I traveled a lot as a younger, even 18, 19, went to London, went to New York, etc., for working holidays, whatever you want to call it. And before I was going to London, he said, Jonathan, I just know one thing. He said, if you're stuck, even if you're broke, just pick up the phone, do a reverse call charge, even if you don't have the money, and I'll get you a flight home. And just knowing that sense of security, I had such a mattress, such a backup plan, I took risks that many people wouldn't. And I think that's the same for a baby who has been cared for by the mom and the dad and the family in such a way that they have this inner sense of security, that they're prepared to go out and strive in life and take risks that maybe other people don't. So there's a huge psychological element. There's one more story now that I remember, is when we were in the hospital in Norway. We had a fantastic set of midwives. They're called Jordmor. In my mind, I actually think of Jordmor. I don't think of midwives, because Jordmor is the Norwegian word for a midwife. And she came in and said, okay, well, you know, Monica had the baby, and says, okay, well, the baby actually needs to smell you too. So I had to lie down on the bed, take off my shirt and put the baby, so he smelled me. And I was lying there with him. I was exhausted. Now, I didn't go through the birth, but I was exhausted, right? And what happened then was, I was exhausted. I fell asleep, but at the same time as falling asleep, I felt every breath he made. It was the weirdest sensation that I actually was completely unconscious physically, like my eyes closed, I was asleep for the whole world, but I knew every breath. If he had have jerked one hand, I would have been up in a second. It's a really strange new internal thing. You know, I think mothers find it a lot, maybe more than dads. And I can say about my wife is they'll wake up 2 minutes before the baby wakes up. You know, even their body will start giving milk a minute or two before the baby wakes up. And you learn with children, and when you do this, is to retrust your instinct. You know, that's how I would put it.
Yes, those are such beautiful examples and powerful examples. And I was going to ask you, I think one of the things that people are worried about when it comes to breastfeeding is that the partner that isn't breastfeeding will feel as if they're not able to connect with the baby. What is your take on this, having experienced it 4 times over?
Um, I think the first time is the most important. And we were living just outside Oslo at the time. And I remember very well a military man who was much my senior at that time. I was sitting down in the coffee shop that we normally went on a Saturday. I got to know this guy over a period of weeks and months. And he says, Jonathan, the first 2 years are really for the mom. You know, there's a physical connection between the baby and the mother. And then when they hit 2 and 3 and 4 and they start to walk and move, that's when the father comes in. So he kind of gave me this model just to sort of, I mean, I was out of the picture completely, but that's a special time of bonding between the mother of the child. And my time was going to come when they became more physical and yeah, it's more a physical thing. Like I loved when our first kid started to walk. Or crawl and then walk, and I had to put mattresses higher and higher and higher to kind of keep him in a safe area because he loved to climb, like I'm sure like most kids do. And then at that stage, which close to walking, we're talking around close to 1 year old, that's when I started to become a greater part of my child's life. And I think that guy telling me there's a time for the mom and there's time for a dad, and it's not an exact time, it's not 1 year, it's not 2 years. You'll figure it out as you can become more involved. It set my expectations that, okay, yeah, I don't need to feel left out right now. This is her time, my time is coming. So that will be the best answer I have there, Ariana.
We've experienced similar things in our family because my son was our first child and he was so attached to me. But around a year and a half, and then he would have weaned a year beyond that. Like around a year and a half, he started becoming more of like the daddy's boy, you know. And like you said, more physical,
Yeah,
he can move around. And then whenever he weaned and I had my daughter or our daughter, it's like that's when he had this, he's still connected to me, but he's so much about being with my husband. And it's different because like in the
yeah.
first few months of life, I thought that was never going to happen. But now they're just so close to each other. You know, he just wants to be with my husband all the time. So we've experienced very similar things to what you've said there. Um, Jonathan, I actually have a surprise for you.
Okay, okay.
I,
People, I get nervous when people say surprises because I love good surprises, not bad
This
ones.
is no, this is a really good surprise. So I knew that I was going to have
Okay.
you on. I knew that I was going to be speaking to you about parenthood. So I actually reached out to Monica ahead of this episode, and I asked her what it
No way.
I asked her what it has been like to parent with you. So I'm going to read you the message from her, if that's okay with you.
Oh my God. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It says, life with Jonathan has been an incredible adventure. His desire to discover the world and to learn better skills to live every day made this journey together a very exciting one. I deeply admire his ability to stay calm in the ups and downs of living. This gave me and our 4 boys the strength to face even the most difficult situations with more ease. Jonathan is a loving and caring dad. He has great trust in each one of our boys, and he encourages them to follow their passions and to believe in themselves. He is always ready to help them if they need help, while inspiring them to be adventurous and independent. Most importantly, he loves playing with them and always reminding them that life is fun. And she capitalized fun.
I'll be honest with you. I feel like crying inside, Ariana. That's beautiful. Thank you very much.
So I just love that, you know, you were talking about being able to play with them and have a connection with them. And then Monica has highlighted I'm feeling emotional too. Monica has highlighted so much of what you've been able to do for them as their father.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I'll have to have a word with Monica later. She kept
Well,
that one well hidden.
she and I work together. And for people who don't know, Monica, his wife, also enjoys photography. She's a fantastic photographer as well. So I've enjoyed looking at her work. And if you hadn't connected us through Instagram, I might not have been able to prepare that surprise for you all these months later.
So I set myself up, is what you said.
You did, you did.
Oh
But
dear, oh dear.
are there any words that you have for Monica about what it's been like to parent with her and to go through this process of parenthood with Monica by your side?
Oh wow. I think she's taught me so much. I think I even said that before this came on, like how to be a dad. I came from we say a much more rigid, um, I don't know what the right word. We're not physical in Ireland. We don't hug each other or kiss each other as much as what Italians, because she's Italian. So the ability to be physically caring in a nice way was, she actually taught me that as much as she taught the kids that. So I feel like I'm her fifth child or her first child, and the other four came along. Um, it's been fantastic. I've done a lot of learning from her because she's always looking for, because it's not just about the breastfeeding in the beginning. There's a whole lifetime of issues. A kid gets a cut, gets a certain type of sickness, and she always wants to have the root cause. She doesn't want to just get rid of the symptoms. And that meant nights on Google doing whatever, bringing the kids to courses as they had different problems, rather than, giving them a tablet and getting rid of the symptoms. So yeah, from the physical kindness and the ability to really want to do a root cause analysis, I call it, very clinical, and research and explore things around the world to solve the problem rather than do that. She's actually an inspiration, really, in many ways to me on a personal level. And one thing she's made me think, and I think that goes for a lot of women as well, who've decided in particular to be a mom. I would call her a professional mom in this sense, is if they dedicate themselves to it, they have so built up so many skills that if the workforce wanted to take them back at some point in time, they would actually be lucky to get them, because the ability to organize, the ability to think from different perspectives, solve problems, and I don't mean problems that come up now and again, but they're going to repeat. So you really have to solve them for the longer term. Mothers, if they dedicate them, and when they dedicate themselves, become incredible assets, and it's really well worth putting on your CV. I've taken care of this many kids in this type of environment, etc. And they're as justifiable as any other career move. And anyway, just back to Monica, she's really inspired me as a person, and delighted to be on the journey with her.
That's beautiful. Just to close out the interview, I always, it's one of our things here at Well Fed Photography that we always want to live life in a way that outlives us. Every client experience, even experiences like these, we want to make sure that what we're doing is going to outlive us. It's going to have a positive influence. And so I'm wondering, through the work that you've done, or the book you've created, or the parenting you've done, what does Jonathan McGuinness want to leave as a legacy? What do you want to leave as a legacy through the work that you're doing and through the person that you're being?
That's slowly becoming clearer and clearer to me, Ariana, and I've made quite a few adjustments over the last few months. What I do now, I'll give you an example to bring it into it. I wake up at dawn every morning and I go for a walk with my dog, connecting to nature before I do anything. And that wasn't easy, because I love to stay in bed. I would have been the person stayed in the bed last minute, grab the cup of coffee and go and do what I have to do. So now I was up at 6:51 this morning, walked the dog. And what was really important about that was keeping my word to myself. So when we actually keep our word to ourselves, we value ourselves, and that's how we build our self-worth, our integrity, and it really works well to build your word to yourself. And if you do it to yourself, you'll do it to everybody else anyway. And then like a bit of my morning routine now as well is, then I think about, well, what's my future self going to be like? What's Jonathan going to be like in 2024 now, in 3 years' time? Who do I want to be? It's not necessarily what do I want to have or go. They are some of the things, but I would like to admire the self that I'm going to become in 3 years' time. And I do a bit of work on that every day. It's like an investment. You know how you invest money in a bank? You also invest your imagination in your future. And I do that every day now, journaling. And then I also go through digging a little bit of stones out of the garden. So there are events in my past which I've learned that, have had a negative effect on me. And if we don't do something about them, we'll repeat the patterns that they're causing in us. So I'm become a huge fan of journaling and sort of, not the things, not taking the victim attitude of the past, but the beneficiary attitude. Happened for me, not to me. And I just think that simple lesson of building our word to ourselves, investing in our future, but with our imagination. And if our imagination goes there, so will our businesses, so will our money, so will our relationships. And if the past, we actually make that imagination bigger, because it's the past holding down with those traumas that restricts our imagination about the future. I think that simple message somehow brought into a person's life brings us back to a very, very powerful place, because we can get lost in the distractions, in the day-to-day work, in the transactional things we do. But life, I think, is that simple, and always add in the fun.
I love that. What's one of the most powerful questions that you ask yourself on a regular basis?
Oh, this has been a good one, because this has been a journey. In 2001, I Personal Power 2, a 30-day cassette course. And one of the days was ask some questions that you'd like to ask yourself every day. So set for the day. And for a long while, I said, wonderful and unexpected things will happen to me today. Now, I love that, and a lot of people even love it. But then I realized after maybe 5 years, to me, oh no, will I make happen today was a change. And then that was being active. And then even it was like, it went beyond that. It's, hold on, we're all one. It's happening through all of us. It's not just about to me or me being active, but we're working together in collaboration with people, with spirit, with nature, whatever. So that has probably been my most powerful question. And every few years it adapts itself to, yeah, what wonderful unexpected things are going to happen through and around me today, which is, I will say I thank Tony Robbins for that, even if it was only on a cassette tape, because that has grown and evolved to be one of the rocks that my character stands on.
Yes, gotta love Tony. Where can
Yeah.
people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you? Where can they listen to Questions of Fire podcast if they want to listen in?
Sure. Okay. If you want to get in touch with me, just look on LinkedIn or Facebook, look up Jonathan McGuinness. You'll find me quite easy. In terms of the Questions of Fire podcast, you'll now find it on YouTube, Spotify. Facebook group is where I started it all, and have that information maybe in the comments below, etc. Just reach out to me with a message, and everything starts from one message.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jonathan, for your time. It's been beautiful. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate you sharing the evolution of all that you've gone through and what you've learned to this point. And I would love to maybe in a few years' time even do a follow-on episode to see where you are in 2024.
Well, where the future me will be. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. Look forward to it.
Chat with you soon, Jonathan. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye, Ariana.
We hope you've enjoyed the show. Please feel free to leave a comment or a review to let us know what you loved about this episode and others like it. And if you'd like to be featured on our show, or if you know of someone who would be an amazing guest, get in touch with us at info@wellfedphotography.com and mention Living a Life Well Fed in the subject line.